to start off by apologizing. I have had 6 children who've gone through the education system in Ontario, and I'm sure that you will never have been the same again after dealing with my 6 children. But they were really nice people, really. I am here this afternoon to talk to you about a couple of things. One is the work of our office, especially the work that we do from a systemic point of view. As well, I'll be talking to you about some upcoming legislative reforms which will affect you, if passed, and they sure look like they're going to pass. And then we can take some questions on just about anything you'd like to ask me about our work, our office, or things that might happen in the future that could affect you. So, a little bit of history for those that may not be familiar with our office. I was appointed in 2005 as the 6th Ombudsman of the Province of Ontario, and renewed in 2010 for a subsequent term, and sometimes I call myself 007. Now, being the Ombudsman of Ontario is a tough job. You don't make a lot of friends. All you look for is to produce credible results. You uphold the public interest. You make calls sometimes that are very unpopular, which is why there's a great deal of independence that comes with the office. I can't be fired. I'm appointed by vote of the Legislative Assembly, and I can only be dismissed for cause, which is a criminal offense, and a subsequent vote of the Legislative Assembly. So if someone doesn't like my work, there's no reason to rid themselves of me, which is a good thing. That being said, I've often said that the Ombudsman is as popular as a skunk at a garden party. And this is a good illustration of it. I was appointed in 2005, looking all youthful and innocent. And in 2010, well, I'm looking pretty non-innocent. But when I was appointed in 2005, 2010, it was by vote of the Legislative Assembly. They're not a government appointment. When I was alerted of the vote to reappoint me in 2010, I decided to attend the public gallery and watch the full vote myself. But I made sure to bring with me all my friends, as you can see. I'm often asked, who's the watchdog's watchdog? Well, I do have one watchdog, or actually 2 watchdogs, and they make sure I'm taken care of. 2 German Shepherd Huskies, so they're called Shepskis. And one really thinks she's actually a lap dog, the one who's sitting on me right now, who's 75 pounds. And the other one is 85 pounds and knows that she's not a lap dog. So let me talk a little bit about the Ombudsman's office and our organization. I want to say as well, I didn't mention this at the outset, but we are live tweeting this presentation, hashtag OOLive, as you can see from the first slide. So hashtag OOLive, so feel free to tweet along, and I know you've also got a conference hashtag, so feel free to tweet, except if I say something embarrassing, please. We oversee 500 different government bodies, everything from all the government line ministries, such as the Ministry of the Attorney General, Ministry of Education, all the ministries of the provincial government we oversee. We also oversee what we call ABCs, the agencies, boards, and commissions, and quasi-judicial tribunal. The mandate allows that I can investigate on own motion. I don't need complaints. Also, provided in the mandate are very extensive powers of investigation. The legal words used in the Ombudsman Act is I can investigate matters, decisions, inaction that is unfair, unjust, improperly discriminatory, etc., or things I believe are just plain wrong, making basically the whole act redundant, because I can investigate what I think's wrong. So it's fabulous flexibility to do good things and have fun with the mandate, helping people. The Ombudsman legislation is remedial legislation, which means we have to interpret it very broad perspective, generous interpretation, because it's not meant to punish people, it's meant to improve governance. Now, the non-legal interpretation of what I do, when I discuss what I do to non-legal bodies, I discuss the role of the Ombudsman as humanizing government. We're there to remind government that there are human consequences to the administrative decisions they make. So when we're here on Bay Street, in a skyscraper, in a government office, where a public servant makes a decision, we like to be the ones reminding the public servant of the consequences of that decision on individuals, on communities. And that is essentially how we see our job from a practical, non-legalistic point of view. The Ombudsman's office is constituted under a statute that on the one hand gives our office tremendous, robust investigative tools that even the police don't have. We have the power of entry. We can enter any premises where it is relevant for us to conduct our investigation without anyone's permission, without having any kind of warrant. We can seize information that we believe is relevant to our investigation. We don't go through access to information, we don't go through all these hoops. We come in the government office and we say, we want all your emails dealing with this issue. Sometimes it's a situation of, be careful what you wish for. One of our last investigations, we did ask for that, and we got 150,000 emails. We can also compel witnesses to testify under oath. The Ombudsman cannot be sued. The Ombudsman cannot be compelled to testify in court. Every time I say this, people say, well, of course, when you're acting as Ombudsman, of course. You can sue me if I run you over, but if I'm doing my job as an Ombudsman, you can't sue me. The reason for that is, you have to balance all the access we have and the powers we have to gather information, and then you have to protect that information, otherwise we'll be in court all the time. And we are already in court all the time. There's virtually not a week that goes by where we don't have to send lawyers to quash subpoenas that seek to compel me to attend court. Why? Because we investigate sometimes some pretty nasty stuff. We produce reports that are pretty edgy. So lawyers get involved, and like, okay, we're going to sue here, but we want access to all the Ombudsman's file. And we cannot become a tool to litigants who want to use our office to further their private interest. Same applies for the inability to sue the office. And this is to protect us when we issue a report, so I can say what's on my mind. If I believe an organization has been negligent, I can't be exposing myself to, as an officer of Parliament, to being sued for coming to those tough conclusions. Again, the Ombudsman's office, to counterweigh all the powers of investigation, provides that we don't have the power to enforce our recommendations. So we don't have the executive authority to actually force the government to carry out our recommendations. And I've never sought anything more than that. The Ombudsman's office in Ontario was a descendant of the Swedish parliamentary ombudsman. It would be inconceivable to have that power. We don't need that power. We managed to get approximately 99% of our recommendations implemented. So that's a pretty good batting average. If you provided for binding authority, if I could issue orders to the government to implement recommendations, the problem would be then you have to provide for an appeal for my decision, because normally when you have the executive authority, there's an appeal. And so then you change all the rules of the game. So it's not necessary to have the power to enforce recommendations. Another interesting feature in our office is that our legislation provides that it is an offense punishable by a fine or jail to impede, obstruct, or not cooperate with the Ombudsman. So I'm pleased to report to you we always get stellar cooperation. Wonder why. There's never been a prosecution instituted Once in a while, though, we do get a bit of run-ins and lack of cooperation. We must remind the person being difficult that we have the ability to sanction their behavior through the courts. So all this to say that the power of the office relies solely on moral suasion, la persuasion morale. And moral suasion means the ability to galvanize public opinion, the ability to convince the government that they're wrong about something. And the way we do that, and it's a whole formula. People say, what's the number one thing you have to do to get the government's attention to change things? It's a whole bunch of elements that fit in one formula. It means our reports have to contain unassailable facts. We can't get them wrong. If we get our facts wrong, we lose credibility. Our recommendations have to be reasonable. We can't recommend something completely off the wall. It's crossed my mind from time to time, but I gotta resist that. It means that we need to network, communicate with stakeholders, such as yourselves, the public. I don't know how many public engagements I've given the last 2 weeks, but it feels like it's every day that there's a major crowd that I have to speak to, and that's good because we're communicating, we're sharing. It also means we have a pretty big media footprint and pretty big social media footprint. And we speak closing on 27,000 followers, many of whom are part of the media. Right now, as I'm talking to you, this session is being recorded and will be uploaded on our channel on YouTube right after this presentation. So we're trying to maximize all the tools to get our message out. You know, when you say the word ombudsman, some people look at you and they think it's something you buy at IKEA. And they wouldn't be that far off because it is Swedish. But our job is to make sure when we say the word ombudsman, they don't think of IKEA. So we handle about 30,000 cases a year. It went up 40% last year, without any increase in jurisdiction. I'm often asked by people, well, does that mean the government is 40% more screwed up than the year before? And my answer is no, it doesn't mean that. It means that people more and more are realizing through our networking and outreach that the Ombudsman's office gives hope for people with problems. There is something in society known as complaint fatigue. This is when you get tired of complaining. I don't know about you. Maybe teachers don't get tired of complaining. I get tired of complaining. You know, it's, how many times you open a bill, you know, you think you've been overcharged by a few bucks, and you're like, oh, I'm not going to bother with complaining here. I'm just going to pay the damn thing. You get tired of complaining. You get tired of complaining because it's complicated to complain, right? You call a company, they refer to somebody else, you got the wrong number. It's just, you get the runaround, you make several calls, you want to pull your head out. And in our business, we see that a lot. People get frustrated with the provincial government and say, oh, what am I going to do here? I'm going to give up. And part of our job is to renew faith in government. People may wonder, well, you're always criticizing them. How can we have faith? Well, by criticizing and resolving issues, we're creating better governance, reconnecting citizens with their government. And by so doing, we increase the confidence in citizens in their government. You may be aware right now we're investigating Hydro One. And when I decided to start investigating Hydro One, there were 200 complaints a couple of years ago, then it went up to 647. I said 3 times the complaint. That's interesting. Let's have a closer look. And then looking at our caseload, we realized that there were complaints about unintelligible billings, multiple bills arriving in one shot after no bills came out for 6 months, 12 months, overcharging, somebody waking up, huge amounts of money taken from their bank account through automatic withdrawal. Some people because they owed it, some people just because of an administrative error. And then being told, well, we don't issue refunds, we made a mistake, so we'll give you a credit. for $20,000. You can't eat having a hydro credit of $20,000 is not very helpful. Anybody here deals with Hydro One? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Yes. So you'll know that what I'm talking about. So it went from 200 to 647. We launched an investigation. We let everybody know we're investigating Hydro One. Suddenly, the explosion, the tsunami of complaints regarding Hydro One, rolling in. The investigation's been going on now for over a year. It's still coming in at about 12, 13, 14 complaints a day. We are now investigating nearly 9,500 Hydro One complaints. So 200 to 647 to 9,500. So if we hadn't been investigating, it would have probably stayed around 600, 700. Now we're investigating. It's like, hey, now there's hope. A very interesting thing happens with Hydro One is that the complaint ineptitude of Hydro One knows no barriers. They don't discriminate against gender, status, skin color. We've had come to our office, judges have complained, chiefs of police have complained, right down to students, everybody in between. It's a very interesting case. So the fact our numbers have risen 40% since last year is partly thanks to Hydro One, or no thanks to Hydro One, but it's also because we provide a renewed hope in government that things get dealt with. Now, out of those 30,000 cases we do a year, we pick 5 or 6 a year where we launch a systemic investigation. So the Hydro One case is a systemic investigation. So a systemic investigation is one that raises the question of, is it in the public interest to conduct? Are we dealing with an egregious situation on the face of it? Is it a kind of case where informal resolution will not be possible? Where you need some fact-finding in the field and the production of a report with formal recommendations. So we look at our caseload every year, we pick 5 or 6 cases, and then we launch a systemic investigation to provide for answers. So all the rest of our caseload, we try to resolve informally, causing the least amount possible of waves. And in our annual reporting during the year, we roll them all into vignettes and stories that are anonymized for everybody to see. But for 5, 6 cases a year, we dig in, we do a systemic investigation, which is done by our SORT team. I consider systemic investigations to be very important in our system of Ombudsman. It's kind of the sledgehammer approach to the mandate, but it's one that's provoked some extremely positive results for many people and has really put the office on the map for doing serious, complicated work. These are 3 cases I'll be talking to you about this afternoon, 3 examples of systemic investigations. One into the fraud in the lottery system, called a game of trust. The second case, caught in the act, is our investigation of the unusual, unconstitutional powers given to the police during the G20 meeting here in Toronto. And finally, careless about childcare, which is our very latest, hot off the press, 2 weeks ago, investigation. Let's talk a little bit about these cases. You know, the lottery case is a very interesting case. It is the first and one and only own motion that I have conducted in our office. That is, without any complaints. With a complaint load of 30,000 complaints, when I feel like we should look at something, I call up our case management tracking system. There's always bound to be a complaint about something that I can use to advance a concern that I have and declare an investigation. But the OLG is a case that I had no complaint about, but simply I had strong suspicion that something had gone wrong after reviewing a piece on the Fifth Estate. So let me tell you a little bit about this case. If you want to read more about it, everything's on our website, so you can find this very, very quickly. But let me summarize here, for the purposes of our presentation this afternoon, let me be very succinct. You can get more details and exact numbers from our report. Meet Bob Edmonds. This is Bob Edmonds. He was 82 years old. Bob Edmonds used to want to check his lottery tickets the old-fashioned way. He wasn't internet savvy. He just was the guy who, like many seniors, walks over to his retailers and simply hands them over the ticket, say, did I win? So Bob Edmonds went to his local retailer, handed over his ticket, did I win? Retailer swipes the ticket under the computer, jingle, jingle, bells, bells, you won. So the retailer throws $10 at Bob Edmonds and says, don't spend it all in one place, enjoy your day. So Bob Edmonds was very happy and won for a while, goes home. Next week, he gets his free community newspaper. He sees his retailer holding up a big check. You know those big checks when you run the lottery? He's holding a check for $250,000, but with the numbers that were Bob Edmonds' ticket. Remember the Mulroney government when he did something that really angered the seniors? He regretted that. The seniors have one thing on their side we don't, that's time. Don't take on a senior. So Bob Edmonds went out and decided he's going to sue the Lottery Corporation. And the Lottery Corporation fought back, saying if you have an issue with fraud, if you don't like your retailer, that's between you and the retailer. We are clean your hands of it. Go after the retailer. They fought him. They spent $500,000 fighting him for his $250,000. And Bob Edmonds was a guy who had an explanation for all his numbers. He had 6 numbers. 2 is when he was out of diapers. Number 6 is when he got his first gerbil when he was 6 years old. This kind of thing. He had an explanation for all his numbers. He could prove to the Lottery Corporation where he bought his tickets and when and dates, and he had it all written down somewhere. The Lottery Corporation said, sorry, you're out of luck. Move along. We do not agree that we have anything to do. It's between you and the retailer. And this is what caught our eye, because we thought that the Lottery Corporation is a public servant. And as a public servant, it had a duty of care to citizens. You can't just wash your hands of it. So we launched an investigation into this, and what we found was pretty startling. We found that over 13 years, there were almost $200 million won in suspicious circumstances by retailers. We found a network of retailers winning way disproportionately as compared to ordinary citizens. We found that the OLG was aware that there was rampant fraud in the Lottery Corporation, but was just turning a blind eye to it. We found a memo from the Vice President to the CEO of the lotteries. And what did he tell him when the Vice President said, I have a feeling that there's fraud in the lottery system being conducted by retailers? What was the answer of the CEO? Sometimes you have to hold your nose. So we issued a report, and the consequences of the report have been phenomenal. We were called by the state of California. Our report made waves around the world. It was in the Chinese newspapers, it was in the Australian papers. The Ombudsman of Iowa, the state of Iowa, conducted a similar investigation, came to similar findings. The state of California decided to consult with us, after which they decided, instead of doing an investigation, they did a secret shopper program, where they would grab a whole bunch of people, dress them up as little old ladies and little men, with a cane walking in with a winning ticket, just to test the integrity of retailers. And they found that 20% of retailers were stealing winning tickets. What we found was a lottery corporation that just didn't care, basically didn't care. They were too concerned about their image. After our report came out, the Ontario Provincial Police conducted several investigations, criminal investigations, and there were several charges laid as a result of our report. Some homes were seized. I mean, I have to tell you one thing, these retailers who are stealing tickets, they have good taste, okay? There's a big mansion in like Mississauga, beautiful. You know, Rolls Royces driving by. They have very good taste. Don't underestimate somebody with a lot of money. They can do lots of good stuff. Now, from a retail perspective, you can buy lottery tickets. It's day and night compared to before. Before you had to sign the back, maybe, you know, you cash it in, cash it out. Now you have to sign the front of your ticket. Now you have self-scanners in all locations, so you don't have to rely on your retailer to scan it. Retailers can't buy tickets for themselves. Some of them are saying, I sell tickets all day. I'm like, I'm obsessed with it. So, you know, so now they can't buy tickets for themselves. Right now, if you win any significant amount of money, the phone line from the OLG starts ringing in the retail before you leave to tell you that you won. So they call, and they say, put the customer on the line. They actually speak to somebody at the OLG saying, freeze, you're a millionaire. You know? Don't leave. Soon there'll be a cage dropping from the ceiling. Yeah, so we now have a very, very secure lottery system, which is thanks to the work that we've done, and we feel very happy with that. The OLG, of course, went through successive CEOs that were hired and fired, boards hired and fired, until the government felt they had the right people running the organization. And we, despite the pushback from the lotteries during the investigation, despite the pushback when they saw the report, they finally came to the realization that they couldn't have done it without our work, without us using the cattle prods on them and giving them a good jolt. The shock of the Ombudsman's report brought about deep and systemic change within the corporation in a very short order. It is unlikely that this could have been achieved through more conventional or traditional means of organizational reform. The second case I'd like to talk to you about is the G20. The G20 happened here in Toronto in June of 2010. And again, it really shows what can happen when people lose sight of the public interest. In this case, the Chief of Police of Toronto, Bill Blair, on his own, contrary to what the military, the federal government, RCMP believed, he petitioned the government to have special powers extended to the Toronto Police during the G20 conference. All the other police services that were helping out were satisfied with the criminal code and common law authorities to maintain peace and quiet during the conference, but Bill Blair wanted more. Bill Blair got more. The province of Ontario decided to invoke the Public Works Protection Act of 1939. The Public Works Protection Act of 1989, PWPA, is wartime legislation that was meant to curtail Nazi threats and activity in Canada during World War II by providing exceptional power to law enforcement authorities to arbitrarily arrest or detain people when they believed that the infrastructure in Ontario was at risk. It's pretty powerful stuff. Except that something happened since 1939, and it's called the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in 1982, that provides that arbitrary arrest or detention is unconstitutional. Oops, I think we got a problem. One of the most troubling things that we uncovered during the investigation of the G20 is that the provincial government had issued an edict that going with the Public Works Protection Act should be kept under wraps until we are ready for it to be known to the public. Everyone was on board with drawing out the actual release of that knowledge to the public for as long as what is reasonable. So there was a concerted attempt to camouflage, to hide the reenactment of the Public Works Protection Act. Why do you think that the provincial government would have acted so surreptitiously? There were ads in the paper at the time talking about road closures, talking about how to get to where you wanted to go that weekend, City of Toronto, Government of Ontario, Government of Canada. No mention in any of this information about the Public Works Protection Act. Why not say, you know, we have made it illegal for you to protest. You may be subject to arbitrary arrest or detention that weekend if you get too close, if you don't like the way you look, because it's arbitrary detention and arrest. Why? Simple reason is that I believe that those who invoked the Public Works Protection Act were well aware that it was unconstitutional. And by advertising it, you were opening yourself up to suits by civil liberties associations, bad media. So better to keep it under wrap. Well, it's hard to keep it under wrap when you arrest and charge 1,400 people, plus illegally detain thousands of others. So the core of downtown Toronto was protected by, for those who were nearby or remember it from the news, this humongous fence. Right? This was only the core of downtown Toronto. Well, we had a woman who was kilometers away, coming out of the Loblaws with a chicken. And her chicken was searched. Kid you not, it's in our report. People in parks kilometers away getting their glasses seized as a dangerous good. It was really incredible. And of course, all these people, thousands of people, were arrested and detained, thrown into paddy wagons and shipped at a off location made for the weekend police detention center. And although there was 1,400 people charged, I think that in the end there were less than 10 convictions. So you think about it, thousands detained, 1,400 people arrested and charged for convictions that are about as numerous as you have fingers. So we made a very hard-hitting report at the time when we recommended that the Public Works Protection Act be repealed. You know, there were still some parts of the Public Works Protection Act which were still legitimately being used. Right now, if you go to a courthouse, for example, and they have, most courthouses do, have this kind of security where you get scanned like in an airport before you get into the courthouse. Well, the authority to do that is the Public Works Protection Act. And that's a good use of the act. I think you all agree that we don't want knives and guns in courthouses, so that's a proper use of the act. So we recommended that this act be repealed, and if there were needs, if the government sought to continue to use some kind of legislative authority to protect provincial buildings like courthouses, then they should have a legislation which is constitutional and applied properly to the context, not some wide-ranging act. Now, the government introduced an act to repeal the Public Works Protection Act. It was shot down. The minority government didn't get a lot of things done. As I speak now, the Public Works Protection Act repeal legislation has been reintroduced, and the government has signaled its intention to get it passed before New Year's. So bear in mind, it's still in effect. When you go out and party tonight in Toronto, think about that. After our report, the government did what governments often do. They went to a retired judge and said, can you give us advice based on the Ombudsman's report? So they went to the former Chief Justice of Ontario, William McMurtry, who agreed with our findings and recommendations. And hopefully we'll get rid of this act as a gift before Christmas. I am concerned with the Pan Am Games coming in June. And we have to nix this legislation. We cannot see a repeat of the G20 during the Pan Am Games. I think we've got enough of a black eye during the G20 to not see that happen again. The third example that I want to talk to you about this afternoon of systemic work is our investigation to unlicensed daycares. This investigation was sparked by the death of young Eva in Toronto. There were 4 deaths in 7 months in the GTA of children being held in unlicensed daycares. The problem with unlicensed daycares are numerous. First of all, the government was completely unmatched in its regulation, in its inspection of daycares. The law in Ontario allows the daycare provider to have 5 children under their care, not including their own, without being regulated. That's the law in Ontario. So if you want to open a daycare in your house, want to have 5 children, you can have another 5, no problem. You cannot have more than 5 that are not your children. And then you're unregulated. Which means that the government has to have a way to monitor that people aren't abusing the system, right? That they're not having 12 kids instead of 5. Well, one of the results of our investigation is that we found out that the government had 1 inspector for 22,000 daycare spots. That's pretty pathetic. That all types of legal loopholes were being used by daycare providers, or were running a private school that happened to be an exemption under the legislation. So people call themselves private school when they were not. They were just simple daycares. So it's a perfect storm between incompetent inspection and greedy, exploitative daycare providers. And 4 deaths in 7 months. And there were some deaths in Ottawa as well, and a report talked about it all. Well, Eva's daycare, Eva Ravikovich's daycare, was masquerading as a non-regulated 5 and under daycare. Well, let me tell you, where she was being held, there were 29 children, 14 dogs, and these are actual pictures of where Eva was being kept. It was like a scene from an episode from The Hoarders. We also found out in this particular case, we had neighbors and so on complaining 5 times, because neighbors aren't stupid. They see this and they say, come on, what's happening next door? It's ridiculous. All these cars are coming in the morning, it's veering in driveways, causing noise. They complained 5 times to no avail. See, many times when we do our investigations, we then remind people, you're not doing your job. The government comes out with this shiny pony of a model. This is what's going to happen in Ontario. It all looks great, right? But then they don't provide the resources to do the job. The mess we found in this investigation was so bad, I'm recommending the government use it as a cautionary tale in instructing public servants about what not to do. Bring it to Public Service School 101. Study it. We made 113 recommendations all of which were accepted by the government. We provided the government, as we normally do in these cases, advance copies of our report for comment. We do this all the time, right? We give the government a draft of a report, we say, we'll give you a couple of weeks to get back to us. Sometimes the government says, we need more time, fine, but we want feedback. And when we gave them the draft, they said, okay, we agree with everything. So we're going to proceed, and the day we came out with our report a couple of weeks ago, the same day the government introduced legislation to amend the current legislation, and they undertook to accept all 113 recommendations in our report. So that's what I mean, and if we bat an average of 100, we don't need to have the ability to order our recommendations. This is a perfect use of our moral suasion and fantastic results for children in Ontario who should be treated much better than they are. You know, you see in the newspaper once in a while, you know, or the investigative journalism for the Fifth Estate or W5, talking about, oh, look at how many chicken were kept in one coop, and look at how many turkeys were in crowded situations, and everyone flips out. Well, how concerned are we when we don't monitor? We give one inspector for 22,000 spots in a daycare. I love turkeys and chicken, but I put children first. Now, I'd like to talk about the mush sector. And when the Ombudsman Act was introduced in 1975, the first Ombudsman, Arthur Maloney, came out and talked about the fact that the province dropped the ball in not extending the mandate to the broader public service. Because, I'll show you a chart in a moment, but this is what he said: the Ombudsman's mandate should be extended to include such organizations as hospitals, universities, boards of education, and other bodies financed in whole or in part with public funds. So he's steadfastly maintained on day one, it was 3 years after he was in his position, 4 years, but he's maintained since day one that the government erred in the Ombudsman Act by not providing sufficient jurisdiction, a larger sandbox in which to play. So since 1975, every successive ombudsman, me included, I've probably been a little louder than the others, but you know, that's who I am. We've been trying to emphasize the need to get into this broader public sector called the MUSH sector. And the chart really tells it all. And I think this, when I started bringing this chart a few years back, it got the government's attention. And when my first version of this chart, there were a lot more red X's in the other provinces. The other provinces, for example, Alberta, gave their ombudsman authority over hospitals a few years back, followed by Quebec. And child protection in New Brunswick was given to the ombudsman. We saw absolutely no movement in Ontario. So the Ombudsman of Ontario has no authority over municipalities, school boards, hospitals, long-term care, CAS, etc. However, just before the election, right after Premier Wynne was elected, chosen by her party to be leader, she introduced Bill 179 to extend the Ombudsman's authority over municipalities, universities, and school boards. She campaigned on it, got re-elected, immediately reconvened the Legislative Assembly and produced Bill 8, which is identical to Bill 179. Bill 8 is currently debated as we speak in the Legislative Assembly. It's had second reading. It's going forward. And it provides that we will have basically open-ended jurisdiction over municipalities, universities, and school boards. Since I've been ombudsman, we received 19,000 complaints about the MUSH sector. There have been 130 petitions deposited at Queen's Park, 18 private members' bill. It's been incredible momentum to move forward and provide more authority over the MUSH sector. There are in Ontario 7 officers of the Legislative Assembly. That's us. Bill 8 kind of spreads around different authority to different people, but I get the first 3 letters of the MUSH acronym. Since 2005, 2014, this is where the vast majority of complaints have come from in the MUS sector. And again, this is purely for information's sakes. It doesn't mean anything. I'm not a great believer in strict numbers. You have to look at the context. These numbers come in, these complaints, from people who know we have no jurisdiction. You know, who complains to the body knowing we have no jurisdiction, right? So the fact that we're even talking about complaints in the thousands is still quite high. You can imagine when people get to know that we do have jurisdiction. There are in Ontario 444 municipalities. It's incredible. We've been involved investigating municipalities over closed meeting complaints since 2008, so a very slim sliver of authority over municipalities. And I can tell you, from my experience, that there's a lot of dysfunctionality out there in municipalities. There was a time where people thought it was all Rob Ford's fault. He's gone now as mayor. But there are many, many problems at the municipal level. We've got councillors giving themselves salary increases and behind closed doors. We've got one municipality, Cottage Country, it's been meeting secretly for 10 years with the Ontario government on how to dispose of nuclear waste in the backyard of people who have cottages. I mean, there's been some real horror stories, the abuse of expense accounts across different constituencies. Some municipalities have delegated the destruction of heritage buildings to bureaucrats to avoid having hearings. So you wake up one day and there's a heritage building that's been flattened. It's your neighbor. You know, well, what's happening here? Oh, we're putting a skyrise in your backyard. So there's tons of stuff at the municipal level, and I think that it's going to be a real challenge for us to spread the good news at that level, that they're now accountable. There are 22 universities in Ontario. Most of them have their own internal ombudsman, which is good. We don't want to get rid of those local ombudsmen. We are an office of last resort. Always have been, always conducted ourselves that way. We're not a 911. Oh, 911, we got a problem. No, we push back always. And that is true to the nature of the office of being the last resort always to problems. You know, university students like to think that they're the most hard-done-by segment of society. I've had several kids go through university, and to hear them talk, you'd think that they were, you know, doing hard labor in some Russian prison somewhere. And then, of course, we've got the school boards. We've got 82 school boards. Our main interest in the MUSH sector is, will be to look at systemic issues. Doesn't mean we won't, from time to time, do individual issues. We all already oversee public colleges. We've done investigations regarding one public college, Cambrian College, where they were advertising for a course in the health sector, promising a certain kind of job when they came out of the college with a degree. And students graduated much in depth to find out that the university had fabricated this job. It just didn't exist. Not the university, the college had just made up the fact that there were these jobs lined up for them. So these students were unemployable after spending thousands of dollars going through school. So that would be a systemic issue with regards to public colleges. Complaints about school boards. Now, the traditional reason for keeping us out of the municipalities, universities, and school board was that these are very much arm's length from the government, and they have their own level of politics. Right? We elect school trustees, so they're accountable. You know, municipal elections, we have them every 4 years, they're accountable. But what the government finally realizes is that there's nothing in between. It's great to be accountable every 4 years, but what do you do in between? Well, the provincial government has 7 officers of parliament to hold them accountable in between. The federal government has about the same number of officers of parliament. But what do school boards have in between? What do municipalities have in between? And they're still dealing with billions of dollars. The school boards with over $20 billion in expenditures. What we hear complaints about are concerns about student discipline, inadequate special education supports, insufficient response to bullying or over response to bullying, poor communications, illegal closed board meetings. Nah, that can't ever happen, I'm sure. Limited complaint process. So those are the questions that, the issues that have been raised to our office among those complaints. Our approach is always to be neutral, fact-finding, independent, and impartial. That's what our legislation tells us. When we find there is a problem, however, we become advocates. We don't just say, here's our report, and people can do whatever they want. We advocate for our recommendations, because that's the tool we need to use as part of moral suasion. We're cost-effective, we're fast. 72% of our caseload is resolved within 2 weeks. We provide confidentiality to complainants to protect them against reprisals. We work with existing mechanisms at all times. We're not 911. We always allow institutions to fix their own problem. And we make non-binding recommendations. I mentioned to you that we are an avenue of last resort. We've always operated that way. Bill 8, you might be reassured to know, provides that where there is a right of appeal on the merits of a case to a designated school board official or employee or to a committee, the Ombudsman shall not interfere until that right of appeal has been exercised. I am completely fine with this provision. Otherwise, the system will break down. If people can always come to me because I'm going to existing mechanisms, then I'm running the school system. And I don't want to run the school system. So this provision here will send a message out to complainants. They need to avail themselves of existing mechanisms. We're fine with it. In fact, this is a codification of the current practice, and that is how it's going to work. We, from time to time, get involved when the government moves in and appoints a school supervisor, because when the government does that, the supervisor is a government appointee, which triggers our oversight ability. And again, history has shown that when we do get complaints, when there is a supervisor in place, we work with the supervisor to clear up the case. We've never had to launch any kind of formal investigation. We get things moving and resolved. You know, the Ombudsman's job is not a getcha job. We do get opportunities where that happens. But that's not the aim of the game. The aim of the game is improving governance, making things move, making things roll, improving the flow of information, humanizing government, reconnecting citizens with their governors, whether they are part of the government or the broader public service. And that will continue when Bill 8 arrives. We, of course, do not have jurisdiction over self-regulating professions, and we haven't sought, at this point, regulation over them. So we do not oversee your your college. Finally, we take great pride in our office in offering a course called Sharpening Your Teeth, a course for watchdogs. And this is a course that we've taught all over the world. I mean, this gives you an idea where we've taught them. We've taught the course in Hong Kong, in Bangkok several times, South Africa. We've taught it in Namibia, throughout the States, Caribbeans, the UK. We offer the course on a cost recovery basis. People bring us in for 3-4 days, their expenses, we deliver the course. The reason we do a course called Sharpen Your Teeth is so that we can raise the bar of the profession. Our office is known as the leading office in the world, and we like to share with our colleagues from around the world ways in which we can better deliver our services. We offer it every year, once a year in Toronto. In January, we got 80 spots. They get filled very quickly. If anyone here is interested in sharpening your teeth, please consult our website. We'd be happy to have you. As I indicated at the beginning, we have a very big social media footprint. We have a newsletter called an e-newsletter called The Watchdog. We post virtually all my public appearances on YouTube. So people say, well, what's up to this week? What speech did you give, a presentation? And be amazed how many people tune into our YouTube channel. You know, maybe it helps them fall asleep at night, I don't know. But we like to post stuff on YouTube. Twitter, we're very active on Twitter. I usually tweet myself. Right now, of course, I can't tweet and talk, so we have Director of Communications Lynn Williamson who's doing it. Still trying to master that thing. And Facebook, our Facebook's very detailed, updated on a daily basis. Of course, our website. And you can complain using our website, our toll-free number. You can complain from your iPhone. We've got our iPhone app. We've made it easy for people to reach out. We have a walk-in office here in Toronto where you can actually walk in and complain. Our office is right beside here, 483 Bay Street. And we get about 3-4 walk-ins per day. Everybody complains electronically now. That's the way of the future. And it allows us to reach out and be available to more people. So I've spoken exactly an hour. That's what I was asked to do. And I was told to stick around for up to 30 minutes of questions, or 50 minutes of questions, yes. So I'll be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Good afternoon. I'm a very big fan of the work of the Ombudsman's office, particularly yours, sir. I'm from London, Ontario.
Oh, yes.
And that relates to my question. Excellent comments, by the way. Thoroughly enjoyed it. With respect to what you were saying about private organizations, certainly in London, we were those of us who were concerned about the behavior of some of our municipal elected people, who, by the way, I hope you read the entire group of folks who met for burgers, were all voted out. So yes. I think your work was in part due to that, so I know a number of us would like to thank you for that.
Thank you.
My point was, that, and I appreciate what you said, I agree, that certainly internal ombudsman type roles are good. Do you feel, though, that the role you played in that particular situation, I would not have been as confident if someone internal would have had the same result, which was obviously to criticize that behavior. Do you still feel that way? And could you just connect that to the London situation, if you would?
Okay, so there's 2 parts to your question, and for those who are not familiar, London has been one of my problem children in dealing with closed meetings, where they had this fetish of appearing publicly for meetings when it happens to be the law. So they would routinely gather in different hidden locations to conduct city business. And the last case we did, which reportedly called In the Back Room, where they all converged to eat burgers on a Saturday and conduct city business. As they were converging in the back room, citizens in London were being very sensitized that these meetings were happening. And so as soon as they started meeting, they started calling the press and everything else, and they scattered like insects, and we conducted an investigation, found they were meeting illegally. What's really interesting is the city council, they know it's the law to do business publicly, but Many of them, I will say many of them, either don't know the law, or they purposefully don't follow it because democracy is not fun, right? It's a lot easier to meet in a dark corner, do all your city business, than meet publicly, and everybody seems in sync, they all vote the same way without any deliberation. That's why the law forces them out in the open. So that's the work we've done in London, where there was this kind of these serial secret meetings conducting city business, and there was a huge upheaval by the population. And during the election, everyone who was exposed to participating in these illegal meetings were not re-elected. So there is accountability over 4 years. Second part of your question is, do I have faith that internal bodies can go as far as we do? And I'll say no, for the simple reason that internal ombudsmen, call them whatever you like, organizational ombudsmen, report to the organization, normally to like a VP or something, a director. And so they can't go out and publish a report saying, you know, our institution has been negligent, because that person's job would be terminated pretty fast. What the local ombudsman, or like municipal ombudsman, or the ombudsman for universities can do though, is they can sort out the day-to-day grinds, you know. A complaint about the cafeteria hours, you know, a complaint about a pothole not being fixed in a municipality. I mean, that's the kind of stuff we expect municipal ombudsmen to do. But they are ill-equipped to deal with systemic issues because they do not have institutional independence from the organization. It's that simple. You can be all full of what good intentions, but if you're not independent to blow a whistle, then you're limited in your ability to be an agent of change on systemic issues. It's absolutely, absolutely the case.
And just following up on that, actually, that last question, I'm having mixed emotions in terms of, on one hand, I'm happy that I sense that our regulated professions in Ontario do not fall under the auspices of the Ombudsman. On the other hand, I'm concerned whether, in fact, we have the internal capacity ourselves to therefore be truly self-regulating square, to be able to actually assess our own capacities and our own ability to function and to be able to self-evaluate the organization. And while we have government oversight in certain areas from different ministries, and through the Fairness Commissioner recently, and with labor mobility kind of issues, we're still expected to be somewhat that arm's length thing, and yet how do we build in the capacity internally to be able to self-assess and see, in fact, systemically, are we doing these things? Do we rely on our lieutenant governor appointees to fulfill that role on the councils? Do we rely on the council? Do we, here you're suggesting not to go sort of the internal ombudsman route necessarily, but how do we overlay that to actually allow the organization to self-assess and to make sure that it is meeting its own obligations?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, lawyers self-regulate, doctors self-regulate, judges self-regulate, teachers self-regulate, the list goes on and on. And many people are critical and skeptical of self-regulating bodies because they figure that they believe the regulated body is special and they can only be understood by other people from the same profession. This is a charge frequently leveled at lawyers. The Law Society is too cozy, and we've seen lately about the doctors being regulated where information is not passed on to the police, same thing with lawyers. There are issues in all the regulated professions across the board. How do we resolve them? That's the big question. I think it's very important that any regulated profession, that the regulators take a step back and be very self-critical. The public expects process and the rule of law, transparency, all those good things to be applied to professionals just as they're applied to citizens. And there are many ombudsmen around the world that do oversee regulated professions. And now we're about to swallow municipalities, universities, school boards. I think it's a big piece to swallow, but it's not unforeseeable at some time in the future that we do start overseeing these regulated bodies because of dissatisfaction that they're not neutral, objective, and don't hold up the public interest as much as they should. So I don't have the answer to the question, except that it's very important for these regulated bodies to always focus on the public interest and not the private interest of protecting the image of the profession that they regulate.
So, Mr. Marin, we want to thank you for this very interesting and informative presentation. You certainly leave us a lot of food for thought. Very interesting matter, so we appreciate that you took the time, very busy schedule, to be with us this afternoon. It's indeed been a privilege. Thank you very much.